After 9 months of testing, I have finally completed our full AMD X870/X870E motherboard roundup, and with in-depth testing of 53 models, there is a lot to go over. I've tested every single USB port located on the I/O panel for all 53 boards, and I've found one board which I believe to have a design flaw. I've also stress tested every single VRM, noting clock speeds and power draw along the way. It has been an incredibly drawn-out validation process, but we now have all the data. We've also managed to fit most of the product boxes on the desk here, but there are some behemoths that I just couldn't fit. For example, we do have, one moment, this model, which is extremely heavy. We also have this smaller box, but it's also pretty large and very heavy. And we have this box, which is even heavier and even bigger. So almost all the boxes are on the desk. Anyway, there was a stupid amount of work that went into this one. Each board takes almost a day to test, but then there's just everything else that goes into creating this content. We're talking about at least 40 hours just to record the B-roll for each motherboard. And then there's days of warp stabilization and editing that goes into it. And we've done all of this at a time when people aren't actually buying motherboards. So that makes total sense. To be fair though, we did start this journey before the DRAM pricing crisis kicked off. So we're not as crazy as first seems. Not quite anyway. All of that said, we do need to get paid, so today's video is brought to you by Ugreen and Honkai Star Rail collectible gift box. This complete charging kit is inspired by the new S-tier character Yao Guang, combining premium products with a unique visual aesthetic for a custom desk setup or travel companion. This box is packed with Ugreen products including a magnetic power bank, 65-watt charger, retractable cable, FineTrack Apple-compatible tracker, and themed collectible accessories. The MagFlow Air magnetic power bank is ultra slim and features Qi 2 15-watt fast wireless charging with a 10,000 mAh capacity, which also has a handy built-in Type-C cable. The Nexode Air 65-watt charger is a pocket-sized fast charger featuring a foldable plug, compact size, and Type-C output. All of these items also fit neatly into the included travel case. As an upgrade, you can opt for the Nexode Pro power bank, which offers 45-watt of power output, and a smart display for real-time battery monitoring. For more information and the chance to win a gold collectible, please check the links in the video description. The new MSI MEG X870E Gaming Plus Max Wi-Fi is an updated version of the X870E Gaming Plus Wi-Fi, MSI's most affordable X870E motherboard. This new Max version features a 64MB BIOS, allowing the board to better support future AM5 processors. By better, I don't mean 32MB boards won't support upcoming CPU generations like Zen 6 properly, they will, but like what we've seen with the AM4 platform, as more and more CPUs arrive, the AGESA code required to support them gets bigger and bigger, and this means boards with only 32MB capacities for their BIOS will be forced to utilize cut-down user interfaces with less graphics and visual aids. By upgrading newer boards to 64MB means they won't need to feature stripped-down BIOS versions. So this is the key feature the Max version offers, but MSI also decided to change the board's theme from black to white for this particular model. It's now a white-silver board. They've also added in more easy release mechanisms to the primary PCIe slot and Wi-Fi antenna. Beyond that, all other features do remain the same. For example, you're still getting 14 60A power stages for the V-Core VRM, and we're also looking at the same physical board design and layout, for a $20 US premium, bringing the total board cost to $240 US. As for the I/O panel, you again get the same layout, and having tested each port, I can confirm USB performance remains the same as the original board. That means there's just a single USB 4 port, one 20GB per second port, three 10GB per second ports, and 4 slow USB 2.0 ports. Now, in our previous X870 roundup, MSI had just 3 motherboards on offer, one of which was the MEG X870 Tomahawk Wi-Fi, which is still available today for $220 US. However, since then, MSI has massively expanded, and it has to be said, complicated the Tomahawk range. That's because there's now 3 models, the X870E Tomahawk Wi-Fi, the X870E Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi, and the X870E Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi PZ. Focusing on the X870E Tomahawk Wi-Fi for now though, at $320 US it costs exactly $100 more than the original X870 version, and on the surface it's really not clear what you're getting for that money. The I/O panel, for example, is identical. Despite having an additional chipset, this new X870E model features the same configuration. The boards themselves also look physically identical. The same amount of PCIe expansion, the same number of M.2 slots. Side by side, you'd be hard-pressed to spot a difference. Under the heatsinks, you'll also find the exact same VRM design, packing 14 80A power stages for the V-Core. For that extra $100, you do get a second chipset, and this affords the X870E model more PCIe lanes, meaning less lane sharing takes place. For example, the third PCIe x 16 slot on the X870 model is wired for PCIe 4.0x4 bandwidth, but if you place a device in the third M.2 slot, the PCIe bandwidth is halved to just ×2. This does not happen on the new X870E model, as there are 4 more PCIe 4.0 lanes on offer when using the 2 chipsets. That said, there are still some lane limitations, even with the X870E model. For example, the same lane sharing between the USB 4 ports on the I/O panel and the second M.2 slot still exists. When using the second M.2 slot, the bandwidth is halved from ×4 to ×2, unless you disable the USB 4 ports. So, unless you plan on using all the M.2 slots, the X870E model is only a very small upgrade for the extra $100 US. And for this reason, the updated Max version makes more sense, as it should cost just $10 more, but gets the larger 64MB BIOS chip, which is a worthwhile upgrade and helps better justify the price. Then we have the MSI MEG X870E Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi PZ, which is another $320 US model, and as the name suggests, this is a Project Zero board. Essentially, in terms of features, it's identical to the X870E Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi, so you get the same I/O configuration and VRM, for example. The board layout for the most part is also the same, and that means the same PCIe and M.2 configuration, but as a PZ board, this model is specifically designed for a cableless aesthetic by moving most power and peripheral connectors to the back side of the board. MSI's also gone with a white-silver design, which looks stunning, and they've dramatically increased the number of heatsinks on this board, resulting in much of the PCB being shielded by aluminium heatsinks. It is a great looking board, but in order to use it, you will need an ATX case that supports rear-facing motherboards, like the MSI MEG Pano 100RPZ or the MPG Valox 300RPZ, for example. The new MSI X870E Carbon Max Wi-Fi is pretty straightforward. This is the same board as the excellent X870E Carbon Wi-Fi that we looked at in the original roundup. The only change has been the upgraded BIOS that now has a 64MB capacity. Other than that though, they are identical. Well, that and the price. The new Max version currently costs $500 US, whereas the original model has dropped down to just $390 US. It is worth noting that the original did start at $500, and while I found it to be one of the best featured models, I felt the $500 US asking price was a bit too much, especially for an AM5 motherboard. The current $390 US asking price though is much more reasonable, and given that I would not buy this newer Max model, it's not worth an extra $110 US in my opinion. That's pretty insane for a BIOS capacity upgrade. It's an almost 30% premium. Chances are once MSI sells the remaining stock of the original model, we will see the Max version drop in price, but only time will tell on that one. Just to recap though, this model packs 18 110A power stages for the V-Core VRM, so insane power delivery there, and the I/O panel packs 13 USB ports in total, the slowest of which is rated for 10 gigabits per second speeds. Now, a model that we didn't see previously in the AMD 800 series chipset lineup from MSI was their Ace. So we now have the MEG X870E Ace Max, and this model costs $700 US, so brace yourself. For power delivery, MSI is stocking the same 18 110 amp power stages for the V-Core seen on the cheaper Carbon Max Wi-Fi. So the key upgrades here have been made to connectivity, as the Ace Max gets 10 gigabits per second LAN and upgraded audio with an ALC 4082 codec. The way in which MSI has connected the various PCIe and M.2 devices has also changed. For example, all 3 PCIe slots are now directly connected to the CPU, though for all of them to work at full speed, you would require 28 lanes, and most AM5 CPUs only have 24 lanes available, some of which do need to be used for M.2 devices. Therefore, the primary and secondary PCIe slots are configured for lane sharing. So if you're just using the primary slot, you get the full x16 bandwidth, but if you're also using the secondary slot, then the board will split the bandwidth into a x8/x8 configuration. The third slot then shares its bandwidth with the primary M.2 slot, and if you use both of those, the bandwidth is halved from x4 to x2. The Ace has also been upgraded to 5 M.2 slots, one more than the Carbon, but as I just noted, the primary slot does share bandwidth with the third PCIe slot, while the second M.2 slot still shares bandwidth with the USB 4 ports. So there are more physical connections here, but also more lane sharing, as there simply aren't enough lanes to provide all connections with full bandwidth. The good news is, like the Carbon, the Ace has an excellent I/O configuration with loads of high-speed USB ports on offer, all capable of at least 1 gigabits per second. The front USB 20 gigabits per second port also has been upgraded to deliver 60 watts of power, compared to 27 watts for the Carbon. So there are a few good upgrades on offer here, but I'm not sure there's enough to justify spending an additional $200 US, especially given 10 gigabit LAN adapters have come down considerably in price over the last few years. Moving on to the Xtreme X870E Godlike, which wasn't ready in time for our previous roundup, and this model comes in at an eye-watering price of $900 US. Yeah, just for a motherboard. It's pretty difficult to beat the Ace, but MSI has tried anyway. The I/O panel is bursting with USB ports. There's 15 in total, 2 more than the Ace, and again, all are 10 gigabits per second or better. The board is physically massive as well, scaling up from ATX to eATX, so it's not going to fit in all ATX cases. The PCIe configuration is actually a downgrade from the Ace, using a similar configuration to that of the Carbon, but there's now support for 7 M.2 devices, 5 on board, with an additional 2 via the included M.2 Expander Z Slider Gen 5 card. However, when using the Expander card, the primary PCIe x16 slot will be reduced to x8 bandwidth. The VRM is just as insanely overkill as the previous models that we've looked at. Well, even more insane, I should really say, as there are 24 110 amp power stages just for the V-Core VRM. So yeah, I guess why not? You have to justify the $900 US asking price somehow. Speaking of which, MSI has also included what they call Dynamic Dashboard 3, which is a 4-inch LCD that provides the user with real-time hardware monitoring, troubleshooting, BIOS updates, and personalized display options. Admittedly, it does look very cool, though I'd say that's really the extent of it. I can't imagine anyone would use this to monitor their system's vitals in real time. It's hardly practical. There is a lot going on here though, and it's difficult to cover everything in a roundup type video, like the full-size metal backplate, for example, or the 10-layer PCB, easy link, easy PCIe release, easy magnetic M.2 shield Frozer 2, easy M.2 clip 2, easy antenna, and just so much more. It's an insanely heavily over-engineered motherboard that's frankly unnecessary, but that's what the Godlike series is all about, isn't it? Speaking of which, if the Godlike was somehow not enough for you, can I interest you in a Godlike X edition motherboard? For when Godlike simply isn't Godlike enough, you need Godlike X. Everyone knows this. In short, the X edition is a limited run collector's version of the original model. Technically, the two boards are virtually identical in terms of hardware specifications, power delivery, and features. The X version was created to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Godlike series, and only 1,000 units were produced worldwide, and somehow I got one of them. If you have $1,300 US, you can also have one, or an entire mid-range gaming PC instead, your choice. Anyway, this limited model features a numbered golden place card on the M.2 heatsink, except mine says Godlike Hub Steve, so I'll take that. Makes sense. I am pretty godlike after all. I do not require any feedback from any of you guys in the comments section. Thank you very much. Let's move on. So you're also getting a collector's stand, a dedicated USB-powered display stand for the primary M.2 heatsink. There's also X anniversary branding on the heatsink, and a slightly different default color profile for the polychromatic rear I/O display. Finally, you get some physical collectibles such as a Black Lucky the Dragon plush keyring, so that's pretty dope, I think that's the word. Anyway, I think it goes without saying that this model makes no sense in terms of value, not that the original Godlike ever did. Realistically, the Ace Max is as extreme, or godlike, as you should really consider going, and if you need 10 gigabit LAN, just buy an add-in card. Another new model, which we just got our hands on, is the MSI MEG X870E Unify-X Max, and at the time of putting this content together, it's yet to go on sale, so I don't have a retail price, but it may be on sale by the time you see this video. This one has taken us quite a bit of time to put together. Anyway, I have the board, so let's go over it and do some testing. So what is the X870E Unify-X? Well, in short, it's a motherboard designed specifically for extreme overclocking, and it marks the return of the Unify-X series to the AMD platform after a 4-year hiatus. What sets this board apart is its specialized 2-DIMM layout. While most high-end boards like the Godlike offer 4 slots, the Unify-X uses only 2, 1 slot per channel. This design significantly improves signal integrity and reduces latency, allowing users to push DDR5 memory to extreme speeds. Whether or not that is something you need to do with Zen 4 or Zen 5 processors is highly questionable, but if you want to, this board gives you the best shot at it. As an extreme overclocking focused product, it features an RGB-free, minimalistic all-black aesthetic, focusing entirely on performance and build quality rather than lighting. It also includes an external tuning controller, a handheld remote that allows for real-time frequency adjustments, and quick access to clear CMOS and reset buttons without needing to reboot. For the VRM, MSI has gone with 18 110A power stages for the V-Core, while the rest of the board, it's pretty typical. That said, there are 4 PCI Express slots, with the 3rd and 4th slots using PCI 4.0x4 and PCI 3.0x4 interfaces. There's also 5 M.2 slots, 5 gigabit LAN, and even Wi-Fi 7. The I/O panel is littered with high-speed USB ports, and of course there's a pair of USB 4 ports. MSI has also included a PS2 keyboard and mouse port, which might seem unusual, though extreme overclockers sometimes disable USB, so having legacy peripheral support makes sense. Another new MSI X870 board is the MSI X870i Edge Ti Evo Wi-Fi, a little board with quite a name. This is MSI's first and only X870 mini ITX motherboard, and of course they don't have an X870E model, as that wouldn't really make sense. And of course this is why there are no X870E ITX boards. In fact, there are very few X870 ITX motherboards to speak of at all. Asus has just one model, Gigabyte has a single model, Asrock doesn't even make one, and now MSI has a single model. Priced at $400 US, the X870i Edge Ti Evo Wi-Fi costs as much as the Asus ROG Strix X870i gaming Wi-Fi, and about $100 US more than Gigabyte's X870i Aorus Pro Ice, which I featured in my original roundup. So, in terms of features, the Edge Ti Evo packs 8 110A power stages for the V-Core, and to ensure no thermal issues, MSI has installed a large heatsink with active cooling. The standout feature of this board is its 5-in-1 M.2 expander card, and due to the limited physical space on mini ITX motherboards, MSI uses this daughter board to provide additional connectivity that typically isn't possible in this form factor. This allows the board to support a total of 3 M.2 slots, which is a big deal given the models from Asus and Gigabyte are both limited to just 2 M.2 slots. It also features a striking silver and white aesthetic, making it ideal for all white builds. You're also getting 2 USB 4 ports, 5 gigabit LAN and Wi-Fi 7. The I/O panel is also reasonably well stocked for an X870 motherboard with 8 USB ports in total, half a dozen of which are 10 gigabits per second ports, along with two 40 gigabits per second USB 4 ports. Overall, it's an expensive but well-equipped mini ITX motherboard, and probably the best equipped of all the X870 offerings. Now moving on to the new Asrock X870/X870E motherboards that have been released since our last update, and we'll start with the most affordable version, the X870 LiveMixer Wi-Fi, which can be had for $190 US, making it one of the cheapest models on offer, coming in just $5 to $10 more than the X870 Pro RS Wi-Fi. When compared to the Pro RS, the LiveMixer has been upgraded with a more capable VRM, packing 16 80A power stages for the V-Core, up from 14. You're also getting 5 gigabit LAN, upgraded from 2.5 gigabit. There's now a total of 23 USB ports, up from 19, while M.2 support has been greatly improved with 2 Gen 5 ports and 2 Gen 4 ports. Compare that to the Pro RS, which was limited to just a single Gen 5 port, and then a Gen 4, along with a Gen 3, so 3 ports in total, but not the greatest bandwidth. The audio has also been upgraded from the ALC 1220 codec to ALC 4082. The I/O panel packs an additional 4 USB ports for a grand total of 16, and although the number of slow USB 2.0 ports remains the same at 6, there's 4 more USB 5 gigabits per second ports. All of that said though, I should note that outside of the 2 USB 4 ports, there are no ports faster than 5 gigabits per second. The LiveMixer also squeezes in an extra PCIe x16 slot, and all 4 M.2 slots feature heatsinks, which is impressive for an entry-level X870 board. It is worth noting that just 2 SATA ports are on offer, half that of the Pro RS, but I think most users will find the additional M.2 slots more useful. Next, we have the Asrock X870 Challenger Wi-Fi, which currently costs $200, though as I understand it, the Challenger series is meant to cost less than the LiveMixer, and should be positioned just above the Pro RS, but below basically everything else. That said, it is a newly released model in the X870 range, so I assume that pricing is yet to settle in. When compared to the LiveMixer, the Challenger gets the same 16 80A power stages for the V-Core VRM, so that's good. And the included heatsinks are also very large, so power delivery and cooling are unlikely to be an issue for this model, and of course we'll be testing that aspect of the board shortly. There are, however, a number of downgrades. For example, there's just a single PCIe 5.0 M.2 slot, whereas the LiveMixer had 2, though be aware there are 4 slots in total, the rest just offer less bandwidth. Networking's also been downgraded from 5 gigabit to 2.5 gigabit, and the audio has been heavily downgraded to the ALC 897 codec. Then when it comes to the I/O configuration, the Challenger is very much a bare bones option with just 9 USB ports in total, 4 of which are the old and slow 2.0 spec. And this means the LiveMixer has more high-speed USB ports on offer than the Challenger has USB ports. You're getting just 5 high-speed ports here, 2 of which are the USB 4 ports, and then there's a single 5 gigabits per second port, and then 2 10 gigabits per second ports. So although the LiveMixer doesn't offer any 10 gigabits per second ports, you do get 8 5 gigabits per second ports, which is a much better configuration in my opinion. Finally, the X870 Challenger is available in white or black, but at the current asking price, the board doesn't make any sense. And that's because the Pro RS model costs $180, and the LiveMixer can be had for as little as $190, so I'm not really sure where or how Asrock squeezes the Challenger in. Now, currently, the most affordable X870E motherboard from Asrock is the Nova Wi-Fi for $250 US, or at least it was, and that's because Asrock has just rolled out the X870E Challenger Wi-Fi, and they tell us this will be their cheapest X870E model. But as it is yet to go on sale, I don't know exactly how cheap it will be, but presumably, based on what Asrock has told us, it'll end up being less than $250 US. Now, when compared to the X870E Nova, the Challenger's V-Core VRM has been heavily downgraded. Though I don't really view this as an issue, given it still packs 16 80A power stages, which should be overkill, even for the new 9950X 3D2. That said, the bigger downgrade here is the move from an 8-layer PCB to just a 6-layer PCB. Asrock's also cut down on a few other features, such as the wired networking, which sees the Challenger limited to a 2.5 gigabit connection, though you are still getting Wi-Fi 7. They've also dropped the Realtek ALC 4082 codec for the more mainstream ALC 897 codec. The Challenger does offer 4 M.2 slots, but one of them shares bandwidth with the rear USB 4 ports. Now, whereas the Nova model includes enthusiast quality of life features such as a postcode debug LED, physical power and reset buttons, and a fully toolless M.2 heatsink, the Challenger is more basic, requiring traditional screws for most M.2 slots. Now, in terms of I/O configuration, the Challenger is identical to the Nova, so that is a big win for the Challenger, and it means you're getting a dozen USB ports in total. There's 3 5 gigabits per second ports, 5 10 gigabits per second ports, 2 USB 440 gigabits per second ports, and 2 USB 2.0 ports. So a good configuration, especially if it does come in at less than $250 US. And just lastly, I should note this board is available in either an all black or all white design. Next up, we have the Nova, which for our previous roundup was only available as an X870E board, but we now have the base model X870 version for $240, $50 more than the LiveMixer. For that extra money, you're getting an upgraded VRM with 1880A power stages for the V-Core, BIOS debug LED with power and reset buttons on board, an extra M.2 slot, an easy release mechanism for the primary PCIe slot, and some fancy RGB lighting effects. The X870 Nova does drop the third PCIe x16 slot. There's just a single Gen 5 M.2 slot, and there is significantly fewer USB ports located on the I/O panel, with just 10 opposed to 16 for the LiveMixer. There's 3 5 gigabits per second ports, but now just 2 10 gigabits per second ports, along with the 2 USB 4 ports, and then 4 USB 2.0 ports rather than 6. All other features remain the same. For example, you're still getting 5 gigabit LAN, Wi-Fi 7, and the ALC 4082 audio codec. I'd say the Nova is a better looking board, but in terms of features, I'm not sure it justifies the $50 premium. Now, for $320 US, we have the X870 Taichi Creator, a very expensive X870 motherboard. So what is going on here? The key upgrade on offer is the networking and PCIe bandwidth. The Taichi Creator offers 10 gigabit LAN and support for dual PCIe 5.0x16 graphics cards in a x8x8 mode, which is essential for multi-GPU rendering. Asrock stuck with the same 1880A power stage V-Core VRM configuration as we saw on the Nova, and both boards do feature very large heatsinks on the VRM components. The Creator does drop an M.2 slot, limiting it to 4, though like the cheaper LiveMixer, the primary and secondary ports support PCI Express 5.0 bandwidth. The audio has also been upgraded with an integrated DAC. Around at the I/O panel, there are a dozen USB ports, but as this is only an X870 motherboard, Asrock's been forced once again to include some USB 2 ports, though just 2 this time. There are of course 2 USB 4 ports, and you're also getting 2 10 gigabits per second ports, along with 6 5 gigabits per second ports, though there is a catch here. During my testing, I found a design flaw with this motherboard, which forced Asrock to provide a disclaimer on their specification page, though they've only made a small footnote. Asrock claims this isn't a design flaw, and instead was a design choice, but I'm not convinced. The issue I found was with 4 of the USB 3.2 Gen 1, or 5 gigabits per second ports, which are ironically labeled Ultra USB Power. This is humorous to say the least, because if you install a USB device that draws more than just 4.5 watts, this will trigger the port's overcurrent protection, rendering them useless until you completely restart the system. Because our portable USB 4 SSD, which we use for all of our speed testing, requires more than 4.5 watts, the ports trip and stop working the moment I plug the drive in. And this doesn't just disable the port you installed the device in, it takes out all 4 USB ports labeled Ultra USB Power. I should note that I have tested 50 Intel Z890 motherboards, for example, over 50 AMD B850 motherboards, and now over 50 AMD X870/X870E motherboards using this exact USB SSD device, sticking it in every single USB port on every single one of these motherboards, and the Asrock X870 Taichi Creator is the only model ever to have an issue like this. So I'm going to call this a design flaw. Asrock stuffed up big time here, and they can't solve it without a hardware revision. There are 8 USB ports on the I/O panel that can handle external SSDs, but given this flaw and the $320 US asking price, I would avoid the X870 Taichi Creator. Now, like MSI with their X870E Unify-X Max, Asrock too has their own overclocking focused X870E motherboard, the Taichi OCF. Now, although we're yet to learn the price of the Unify-X Max, we do know what the Taichi OCF costs, and it's a cool $500 US. For that, you're getting a 22 110 amp power stage V-Core VRM, which is 4 more power stages when compared to the MSI model. There's also an extra M.2 slot, because of course an overclocking focused motherboard needs half a dozen M.2 slots, and interestingly Asrock has gone with a dual PCIe 5.0x16 configuration that supports bandwidth splitting for a x8x8 mode. Also, as this is an OC board, there are just 2 DDR5 DIMM slots. As for stuff like networking and audio, both models are very similar. So the Taichi OCF gets 5 gigabit LAN and Wi-Fi 7, along with the ACL 4082 audio codec. The I/O panel is loaded with 10 gigabits per second USB ports. There are 8 in total, and none of them are labeled with Ultra USB Power, so they all work. There's also 2 USB 4 ports, along with 2 legacy USB 2.0 ports, and a combo PS2 port. An interesting feature is the dual BIOS support, and you can quickly and easily switch between them using a switch on the I/O panel. The Taichi OCF is a great looking board, but whether or not it's better than the Unify-X Max, well, we'll have to let the professional overclockers work that one out. Next, we have Gigabyte's X870 range, which starts at $170 US for the X870 Eagle. But here we have the X870 Aorus Stealth Ice, which is about half a dozen X870 motherboards up the Gigabyte food chain at $300 US. The Aorus Stealth Ice can be probably best described as a pretty looking X870 motherboard. There's nothing really unique about the feature set, other than the fact that it's a rear-facing board, so all the connectors are accessed on the back side of the PCB. But it is a clean-looking white board, and it does have a 64MB BIOS. The VRM isn't crazy, though it should certainly be up to the task with 16 80-amp power stages for the V-Core portion. Gigabyte's also strapped on some large heatsinks, and in fact most of the board is covered in heatsinks. There's a large, easy-to-remove heatsink on the primary M.2, while 3 more M.2s are cooled by a massive heatsink covering almost half of the board. Then on the rear side of the motherboard, you'll find a full-size backplate, though it's really more just there for the looks if I'm honest, and sadly once installed you'll never actually see it. And I say it's just there for the looks because there's no thermal pads to help remove built-up heat from the rear side of the PCB, so a bit of an opportunity missed there. Now, as this is just an X870 board, the rear I/O is pretty standard, and dare I say it, pretty underwhelming given the price tag. There's a 5 gigabit LAN connection, easy Wi-Fi antenna connector, 2 USB 4 ports, 3 10 gigabits per second ports, 4 5 gigabits per second ports, and then 4 slow USB 2.0 ports. As I said, it's a very nice looking board, but you really are paying for the design, as there's no crazy or unique features to speak of, like 10 gigabit LAN for example. But if you want a clean white board with rear connectors, the X870 Aorus Stealth Ice will fit the bill nicely. Next, we have the X870E Aorus Elite X3D Ice, and I've got to say Gigabyte has one of the most confusing motherboard lineups there is. There's an X870 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7 Ice, which I looked at in my previous roundup. There's also the X870E Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7 for $275. the X870 Aorus Elite X3D for $310 US, X870E Aorus Elite 3D, no Wi-Fi in the name for that one, for $360, and then finally, the model that I actually have here, the X870E Elite X3D Ice for $370 US. I have to admit, even as a reviewer, I have a really hard time working out which models I've already tested and which ones I'm yet to test. It's a bit of a mess. These X3D models feature the X3D Turbo Mode 2.0 mode, which is something you almost certainly don't want to use. They also have some other gimmicky stuff like AI-driven firmware, whatever that is, presumably firmware that isn't good. But one useful feature is the 64MB BIOS, which Gigabyte calls a driver BIOS because they have a few essential drivers preloaded onto the board for easier installation. Now, when compared to the standard X870E Elite Ice motherboard, the X3D version has also been upgraded with 80A power stages for the V-Core, and there's still 16 in total. Gigabyte has also upgraded the networking from 2.5 gigabit to 5 gigabit, and you're now getting Qualcomm Wi-Fi 7 rather than the MediaTek chip. The primary PCIe x16 slot also no longer shares bandwidth with the second and third M.2 slots. Instead, the second M.2 slot now shares bandwidth with the USB 4 ports, which I feel is probably a better configuration. Around at the I/O panel, Gigabyte has also dumped the 4 USB 2.0 ports in favor of 4 more 10 gigabits per second ports, which is obviously a much better configuration. And that means there are 6 10 gigabits per second ports in total, 3 5 gigabits per second ports, and then 2 USB 4 ports. Finally, the Elite X3D is available as either a black or white board, with the Ice model being the white version. But other than the color, they are identical, though the white version generally costs around $10 US more. For less than a 20% premium, you can upgrade from the Aorus Elite to the Aorus Pro, and with that you're going from a 6-layer PCB to an 8-layer PCB with a massive 18 110A power stage V-Core VRM. Other than that though, they are remarkably similar. The Pro does get a slightly upgraded rear I/O with more USB Type-C 10 gigabits per second ports, but other than that, again, they are identical. And that means you get the same networking and audio solutions, along with the same PCI Express and M.2 configuration. Given the VRM of the Elite should already be overkill, really for all users, I don't see much point in spending the extra money on the Pro X3D model. Now, jumping right up to $485 US, we have the very interesting but super expensive X870E Aorus X3D Wood. This is an interesting and also a bit of an odd model. For example, the VRM has been downgraded to 16 60A power stages for the V-Core VRM, so the weakest VRM of these new boards despite costing by far the most, though it is built on an 8-layer PCB. The key feature on offer here is the wood. There's some timber inserts on the left side of the board, so that's unique, I guess. Other than the wood and leather pull tabs on the M.2 slots though, I'm not really sure what's working here to justify the $485 US asking price. Sure, it has dual LAN, but they're 5 gigabit connections, so that's not exactly amazing at this price point, and even the I/O panel is pretty standard, though there is a single 20 gigabits per second port in conjunction with the dual USB 4 ports. With 11 ports in total, it's decent, but certainly not exceptional. Anyway, if the ability to tell people that your PC's got wood is appealing to you, then the X870 Aero X3D Wood might just be worth the $485 US asking price. Now, whereas Gigabyte did have the X870 Aorus Master, it's now been replaced by the X870E Aorus Master X3D. And there are 2 versions, the standard black model and then the X870E Aorus Master X3D Ice, which we have on hand. They're technically the same product, just a black version and a white version. When compared to the Aorus Pro X3D, the Master X3D gets upgraded audio and networking. The audio now includes a DAC, while the networking adds a second connection supporting 10 gigabit speeds. The V-Core VRM remains the same though, with 18 110A power stages, but the primary heatsink has been upgraded to a model with real finned heatsinks for better thermal dissipation. There are a few design upgrades on offer here. Both the primary and secondary PCIe slots feature easy release mechanisms, and the Aorus lighting on the I/O cover is a little more fancy, but other than that, they are very similar in terms of design and appearance. The I/O panel has been upgraded by removing all USB ports slower than 10 gigabits per second, meaning there are now 8 10 gigabits per second ports, a single 20 gigabits per second port, and the 2 USB 4 40 gigabits per second ports. So it's not a massive upgrade at a nearly 40% premium over the Pro X3D, so pretty difficult to justify the asking price in my opinion, unless you really need the 10 gigabit LAN and for some reason don't want to use an add-in card. Finally, we have the truly insane Gigabyte X870E Aorus Xtreme X3D AI top, priced at $1,000 US. If you thought MSI's Godlike X edition was crazy, you might want to sit down for the Aorus Xtreme X3D AI top, which I'm going to refer to from this point moving forward as the Aorus Xtreme, though not to be confused with the original Aorus Xtreme model, which now looks very bland in comparison. This motherboard is somehow even bigger than the Godlike, measuring in at 305mm long and 285mm wide. Gigabyte's done their best to cram every possible feature into a single motherboard. There are so many features that not all of them come installed. For example, out of the box, the primary M.2 heatsink, it's very small. I guess you could say it comes with a slimline, highly compatible option installed. But in the box is a second massive option that features active cooling, along with an 8mm heat pipe, and it even has some RGB lighting for good measure. Then keeping your memory cool is a plastic housing, and Gigabyte calls this DDR wind blade. Anyway, it magnetically attaches to the motherboard, and this too features active cooling. It's a smoky translucent plastic, so any RGB memory will cause it to glow, which might look pretty cool. There's also a huge LCD screen over the I/O panel, and the entire lower half of the board is covered in an aluminium shroud, with a removable section to access the lower PCIe slots. This isn't a rear-facing board, despite the fact that it looks like one. Rather, all the connectors are located at a 90-degree angle on the top of the board, meaning you access all of them from the side, which is a bit tricky at times, but it makes for a very clean look without the case compatibility issues of the rear-facing models. Now, a massive 24 110 amp power stages make up the V-Core VRM, and they're covered in real finned heatsinks, which is absolute extreme overkill, but why not, I guess. The full-size rear backplate also features a number of thermal pads to remove heat from the rear side of the PCB. Then around at the I/O, there's a dozen USB ports, all of which are 10 gigabits per second or better, with a single 20 gigabits per second port and two 40 gigabits per second USB 4 ports. Next up, we have a motherboard from Colorful. Just a single board. It's the iGame X870E Vulcan OC, so an overclocking focused board then. Unfortunately, at the time of putting this content together, this model is yet to go on sale, so I don't know the actual retail price. It's a pretty good looking board. It certainly looks close to the quality of boards from the bigger players, though the BIOS isn't nearly as well polished in my opinion. Still, it is functional, though I'm not sure how many overclockers would pick it over models from Asus, Gigabyte, and MSI, for example. Anyway, in terms of features, you're getting 18 110 amp power stages for the V-Core, cooled via real finned heatsinks, and in fact, even the primary M.2 heatsink features a real finned heatsink, which is pretty neat. As an OC focus model, there are of course just 2 DDR5 DIMM slots, but interestingly, Colorful has also included 5 M.2 slots and 2 PCIe x16 slots. The rest of the feature set is pretty standard with 5 gigabit LAN and Wi-Fi 7. The I/O configuration is solid, though again I don't know how much this model will cost, but you are getting a dozen USB ports, though 2 of them are the older and much slower 2.0 spec. There's 4 5 gigabits per second ports and another 4 10 gigabits per second ports, and then of course the 2 USB 4 ports. Some other noteworthy features include an LED debug code, along with power and reset buttons integrated into an LCD screen for monitoring hardware vitals in real time. Overall, it's a solid looking board that I am keen to test out. Now, for something a little different, we have the Sapphire Nitro Plus X870EA Phantom Link Polar Edition. Yes, Sapphire's making motherboards now, and at an MSRP of $420 US, this one comes with a very specific and expensive feature. As the Phantom Link name suggests, this board features a proprietary power slot similar to Asus's BTF hidden power approach, designed to deliver high wattage, cable-free power directly to a compatible graphics card. Of course, to actually utilize this feature, you will need to pair it with Sapphire's matching Nitro Plus RX 9070 XT Phantom Link graphics card, which carries a pretty hefty premium of its own. It's a clever idea though that results in a very clean build. But if you don't happen to buy the matching GPU, the primary feature of this motherboard is completely useless. Oddly enough, despite eliminating the GPU power cable, Sapphire hasn't moved the motherboard's main power and peripheral connectors to the rear of the board like we saw with the MSI Project Zero or Gigabyte Stealth Ice models, which feels like a bit of a missed opportunity for a truly cable-free aesthetic. But then maybe they like those braided power cables, and a lot of people do like them, so perhaps that's the idea of leaving them there. This feature aside though, the underlying motherboard is actually very well equipped. Sapphire has packed a robust 16 90A power stage setup for the V-Core VRM, which should be more than enough for any Ryzen processor. It's built on a high quality 8-layer PCB, and as the Polar Edition moniker suggests, it features a silver and white aesthetic shielded by metallic aluminium heatsinks and Nitro Glow ARGB lighting. For storage, you're looking at a total of 4 M.2 slots, 2 of which support full PCIe 5.0 speeds, while the other 2 run at Gen 4. Sapphire's also included some excellent enthusiast quality of life features, such as a tool-free M.2 heatsink and a dedicated LED debug code screen, along with physical clear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons. Around at the I/O panel, the connectivity is very solid. You get a dozen USB ports in total, which includes 2 of those USB 4 ports, 4 10 gigabits per second ports, 4 5 gigabits per second ports, and then just 2 of the older, slower USB 2.0 ports. Networking's also been upgraded, bypassing the standard 2.5 gigabit connection for a faster 5 gigabit LAN, paired with the latest Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4. Overall, it's a technically impressive and visually striking motherboard, but it operates in a very niche market. At an expected $420 US, it's not cheap, and you really do have to be committing to the entire Sapphire Phantom Link ecosystem, and that also means dropping an eye-watering $1,000 on the matching 9070 XT to make it all worthwhile. If you're just looking for a solid white X870 motherboard and have no interest in hiding your GPU cables, there are far more practical options available. Next up, we have the Sapphire Pure X870A Wi-Fi 7, and at $250 US, it's positioned as a highly competitive budget option in the X870 lineup. Sapphire might be better known for their graphics cards, but they've been making a solid push into the AM5 motherboard space, and this new Pure model features a striking minimalistic silver and white aesthetic that looks great for all white builds. And when it comes to power delivery, Sapphire hasn't compromised to hit this lower price point. You're getting 16 55A power stages for the V-Core, and although 55A power stages are a bit lower than the 80 or 110A monsters that we've seen on the $400 plus motherboards, this setup, paired with Sapphire's large brushed metal heatsinks, it should be more than capable of handling a flagship Ryzen 9 processor, for example. The expansion and storage layout is where you start to see how this board hits the $250 US MSRP. There are 3 M.2 slots in total, with the primary slot wired for full PCIe 5.0 bandwidth, and the remaining 2 limited to PCIe 4.0. You also get a reinforced primary PCIe slot. However, one of the biggest drawbacks here is the lack of enthusiast quality of life features. Unlike similar price boards from the likes of Asus or MSI, there are no easy release mechanisms for the primary PCIe slot, and all of the M.2 heatsinks require a traditional screwdriver to remove. Networking support's decent though. The Pure X870A packs a 5 gigabit LAN connection, along with the latest Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4. However, to budget for the faster networking, the audio has been heavily downgraded, sticking with the older and cheaper Realtek ALC897 codec. Around at the I/O panel, the configuration is relatively modest but functional. Interestingly, there's only a single 40 gigabits per second USB 4 port here, which is unusual since almost every other X870 board we've looked at includes 2. Complementing it are just 7 standard USB Type-A ports, 1 10 gigabits per second port, 4 5 gigabits per second ports, and 2 slow USB 2.0 ports. You do get a BIOS flashback button, which is essential, but then no optical audio out. Overall, the Sapphire Pure X870A Wi-Fi makes for an interesting alternative to boards like the Asrock Aorus or LiveMixer. You do lose out on toolless features, dual USB 4 and premium audio, so we will have to see how competitive Sapphire can be on pricing once this board's released. Moving on to Asus, we have the Tough Gaming X870E plus Wi-Fi 7, which currently sits at around $310 US. As the name implies, this board gives you the full X870E dual chipset experience, meaning more PCIe lanes and less bandwidth sharing than what you'd find on standard X870 boards. Now for power delivery, Asus has equipped the Tough with 16 80-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, all on an 8-layer PCB. On paper, this is certainly more than enough to handle the most high-end Ryzen 9 chips such as the 9950X3D2. Then, when it comes to expansion and storage, you're getting 4 M.2 slots in total, and 2 of these are wide for the full PCIe 5.0 bandwidth, and the other 2 run at PCIe 4.0. It is worth noting, however, that utilising the second Gen 5 M.2 slot will halve the bandwidth for your primary graphics card from x16 to x8. You're also getting a reinforced PCI Express slot for your GPU, complete with PCIe slot Q release for easy removal. Unfortunately, that's roughly where the enthusiast quality of life features end, though that's not that uncommon for boards in this price range. For example, there's no onboard power reset buttons or an LED postcode display, and furthermore the M.2 heatsinks still require a traditional screwdriver to remove, which is disappointing when toolless designs are becoming more of a standard. The MSI MEG X870E Tomahawk Wi-Fi, for example, offers a number of toolless M.2 heatsinks along with an LED postcode display. Now the rear I/O panel is a strong point for this board. You're getting a very healthy 13 USB ports in total, and this includes the mandatory dual 40 gigabits per second USB 4 Type-C ports. There's also 3 10 gigabits per second ports and 4 5 gigabits per second ports. Then networking, that's handled by the latest Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4 controllers, but strangely Asus has opted for a standard 2.5 gigabit Ethernet connection instead of the 5 gigabit LAN that we see from MSI and others, and they are offering that for a similar amount of money. Audio is perfectly adequate using a Realtek ALC 1220p codec. Overall, the Asus Tough Gaming X870E plus Wi-Fi 7 is a perfectly capable motherboard with an excellent BIOS and software suite. But at $310 US, it feels a little bit feature light. You're definitely paying an Asus tax here, and unless you specifically want the tough aesthetic or Asus BIOS interface, you can find better equipped boards for similar or even less cash. Now, if you're just looking at the Asus Tough Gaming X870E plus Wi-Fi and thought, I'd really rather have a whiteboard with faster networking and better quality of life features, but a worse chipset with less connectivity overall while paying even more money. Well, Asus has the slightly confusing alternative for $360 US, the Asus Tough Gaming X870 Pro Wi-Fi 7 W Neo. Now granted, this is a new model and pricing might correct itself soon, but as it currently stands, 2 major retailers are selling this model for $360 US. Here in Australia, we have dozens of retailers selling both models, and the W Neo still costs around 7% more, so it's a bit odd. As the W Neo in the name suggests, this board swaps the traditional dark, tough colorway for a very clean, industrial white and silver aesthetic. But the more important distinction here is that this is a Pro model built on the standard X870 chipset rather than the dual chipset X870E. Under the white heatsinks, you're getting the exact same robust power delivery as the X870E Plus with 16 80-amp power stages for the V-Core, all built on an 8-layer PCB. It also includes Asus's newer Nitro Path DRAM technology to help improve DDR5 signal integrity and stability at higher memory frequencies. Where the single X870 chipset really shows its limitations, however, is in lane sharing. You still get a total of 4 M.2 slots, 2 PCIe 5.0 and 2 PCIe 4.0, but the bandwidth sharing is aggressive here. The second Gen 5 M.2 slot shares its bandwidth directly with the rear USB 4 ports. But by default, that M.2 slot runs at half speed times 2, but if you go into the BIOS and force it to run at the full times 4 bandwidth, it completely disables both USB 4 ports on the rear I/O. Fortunately, Asus makes up for the chipset limitations by cramming this board full of premium features that the standard X870E Plus was missing. The W Neo, for example, includes a full suite of Asus's Q design features. You get the PCIe slot Q release, M.2 Q release, and M.2 Q latch for an entirely toolless free installation. Then around at the I/O, you get 10 USB ports in total. This includes the dual 40 gigabits per second USB 4 ports, 3 10 gigabits per second ports, 4 5 gigabits per second ports, and then just a single USB 2.0 port. Networking is another huge upgrade over the X870E Plus. Asus has swapped the standard 2.5 gigabit connection for a much faster Realtek 5 gigabit LAN, alongside the standard Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4. Ultimately, the Asus Tough Gaming X870 Pro Wi-Fi 7W Neo presents as an interesting trade-off at $360 US. You are sacrificing the extra PCIe lanes of the X870E chipset, which leads to heavy bandwidth sharing if you populate all of your storage devices. In exchange though, you are getting a clean white board with 5 gigabit networking and all the essential toolless building features that should have been included on the X870E Plus in the first place. Next, we have the Asus ROG Strix X870E Gaming Wi-Fi 7 Neo. And at $470 US, we are well and truly entering premium territory. As part of Asus's refreshed Neo lineup, this model takes the familiar ROG Strix formula and wraps it in a stunning premium white and silver aesthetic, complete with customizable polymer lighting on the I/O shield. It's a great looking board, but for almost $500, it really does need to be more than just a pretty looking face. Fortunately, Asus has backed up the looks with serious hardware. For power delivery, the board features a very robust 16 90-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, all built on a server-grade 8-layer PCB with 2-ounce copper planes. Asus has also integrated their new Nitro path DRAM technology, which physically reworks the memory slot layout to improve signal integrity, allowing memory overclockers to push to extreme DDR5 speeds. Where this board really starts to justify its premium over the cheaper tough models is in its lane management. Because it utilizes the dual X870E chipsets, you have significantly more PCIe bandwidth to play with. You're getting 4 M.2 slots in total, 2 PCIe 5.0 and 2 PCIe 4.0. But unlike the cheaper boards that aggressively choke your primary graphics card slot the moment you populate the second Gen 5 M.2 drive, this Strix model allows you to load up your high-speed storage without immediately penalizing the GPU bandwidth. Asus has also thrown the kitchen sink at this board when it comes to quality of life features, making it incredibly do-it-yourself friendly. It features the new PCIe slot Q release, along with the M.2 Q slide Q release, and Q latch for a completely toolless building experience. On the rear I/O, you also get some nice features like a clear CMOS and BIOS flashback button. Speaking of the rear I/O, it is very well equipped. Along with the mandatory dual 40 gigabits per second USB 4 Type-C ports, the panel is bursting with half a dozen high-speed 10 gigabits per second USB ports and 4 5 gigabits per second ports. Networking also sees a massive upgrade over the cheaper boards, bypassing the standard 2.5 gigabit connection for a Realtek 5 gigabit LAN, paired with the latest Wi-Fi 7. The audio solution is also top tier, featuring the Supreme FX ALC4080 codec and Savitech amplifier. Unfortunately, $470 US is a massive pill to swallow for a motherboard, especially an AM5 board. However, if you are building a high-end all-white system and want a board with pretty much all the features you could ask for, then this board delivers an excellent, albeit expensive package. Now jumping up to the serious enthusiast bracket, we have the Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Apex coming in at a wallet-draining $730 US. If you know the Apex name, you know exactly what this board's designed for: extreme overclocking and record-breaking memory performance. This isn't really a motherboard aimed at your average gamer, it's a specialized tool for enthusiasts chasing benchmark scores and dumping liquid nitrogen onto their components. The most immediate giveaway of its overclocking pedigree is the 2 DIMM memory layout on an ATX board. By dropping from the standard 4 DIMMs down to 2, Asus is able to drastically shorten the trace lengths and improve signal integrity, resulting in higher memory frequencies. Now for power delivery, Asus has naturally gone completely overkill here, the Apex packs a massive 18 110 amp power stages just for the V-Core VRM. And this is all cooled by some incredibly hefty VRM heatsinks, and the board even features a full-size backplate that adds a serious amount of weight and helps dissipate any heat on the rear side of the PCB. You're also getting dual 8-pin ProCool 2 CPU connectors to ensure perfectly stable power delivery under extreme loads. Expansion and storage are very interesting on this model. The Apex features dual PCIe 5.0x16 slots, with support for x8x8 bandwidth splitting if you want to run dual graphics cards. For the M.2 storage, there is support for up to 5 drives in total, but they aren't all located directly on the motherboard. 3 are nestled between the PCIe slots, while the remaining 2 M.2 slots are handled by the included ROG DIMM.2 card, which slots in right next to the memory. However, just be aware of the aggressive lane sharing here. If you populate the second and third onboard M.2 slots, your primary graphics card slot will be choked down from x16 to x8 or even x4 bandwidth, depending on the configuration. Because this is a premium ROG board, you get the excellent new PCIe slot Q-Release Slim, which lets you remove your GPU simply by pulling it away from the slot without having to press any buttons. There's also a full suite of onboard overclocking tools, a postcode debug LED readout, physical power and reset buttons, flex key, safe boot switches, and a front panel USB Type-C header that supports 60-watt charging. Then around at the I/O panel, you get a solid selection of USB ports. There's 10 in total. Then of course this includes the mandatory USB 4 ports, but there's also 6 10 gigabits per second ports, 2 5 gigabits per second ports, and interestingly, a legacy PS2 port. Of course, the PS2 port is actually crucial for extreme overclockers who often disable USB controllers, which can fail during sub-zero LN2 cooling. Despite the $730 US price tag, networking is limited to a 5 gigabit Realtek LAN rather than 10 gigabit, though it is paired with the latest Wi-Fi 7. Audio is handled by the Supreme FX ALC 4080 codec and a Savitech amplifier. Unfortunately, the ROG Crosshair X870E Apex makes absolutely no sense in terms of value for a normal gaming build. You're sacrificing maximum memory capacity and paying a massive premium for extreme overclocking features that you likely won't use. But if you are a competitive overclocker or a memory tuning enthusiast, this board gives you the absolute best hardware available to push the AM5 platform to its limits. Now we're moving into the ultra premium enthusiast tier with the Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Dark Hero, which commands a massive $700 US asking price. As the name suggests, this board ditches the silver accents of the standard Hero and Strix lines for a completely murdered out look. An all-black stealth aesthetic, if you will. It does look incredibly premium with just a subtle touch of RGB lighting. Asus has equipped the Dark Hero with 20 110 amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, and this is connected by large heat pipe connected aluminium blocks and an armoured metal backplate that adds serious weight, acting like a secondary heatsink. Asus has also included their Nitro path DRAM technology. Now when it comes to expansion and storage, you get dual PCIe 5.0x16 slots and 5 M.2 slots. However, as with all AM5 boards, there simply aren't enough PCIe lanes to go around without making compromises. While the primary PCIe slot will run at full x16, populating the second PCIe 5.0 M.2 slot will force it to share bandwidth with the dual USB 4 ports on the rear I/O. You'll essentially have to choose between running that M.2 slot at half bandwidth or completely disabling your USB 4 ports to give the drive full speed. Then to help justify that $700 US price tag, Asus has included every do-it-yourself quality of life feature that they have in their arsenal. You get PCIe slot Q-Release Slim along with M.2 Q Latch, Q Release, and Q Slide for entirely toolless storage installation. There are also 2 physical onboard power and flex key buttons, an LED postcode readout, clear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons on the rear I/O. Speaking of the rear I/O, it is loaded, particularly if you love Type-C ports. You get 10 USB ports in total, but impressively half of those are Type-Cs. The remaining 5 are 10 gigabits per second Type-A ports. Networking though is where the Dark Hero really impresses, offering not just the standard Wi-Fi 7, but dual wide Ethernet ports, one 5 gigabit connection and the other a 10 gigabit LAN port. Overall, the Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Dark Hero is an absolute tank of a motherboard. But is it necessary for the average builder? Absolutely not. It costs almost as much as an average DDR5 memory kit, so pretty ludicrous. But if you have an unlimited budget, you want a feature-rich motherboard with an all-black aesthetic, and demand 10 gigabit networking alongside premium overclocking features, this is one of the most capable X870E motherboards the platform has to offer. Now, for $760 US, Asus is offering the ROG Crosshair X870E Hero BTF, which takes their standard flagship Hero board and completely flips the script. Literally, the BTF stands for Back to the Future, Asus's ecosystem for rear connector motherboards. Nearly all of the power, fan, and peripheral headers have been moved to the backside of the PCB, and this allows for an incredibly clean, cable-free aesthetic in the main chamber of your case. The most unique feature here is the proprietary power slot positioned right next to the primary PCIe x16 slot. Now, when paired with a compatible Asus BTF graphics card, this slot can deliver up to 600 watts directly through the motherboard to the GPU, entirely eliminating the need for a bulky power cable hanging off the front side of your graphics card. You just have to plug your power supply's GPU cable into the rear side of the motherboard, so that's pretty neat. It looks phenomenal in my opinion, but the downside is, of course, you are locking yourself into a very specific and expensive hardware ecosystem, as you'll also need a BTF compatible chassis that has all the necessary cutouts behind the motherboard tray. Under the hood, this board packs the same Xtreme hardware as the standard Hero, and that means you're getting a massive 18 110 amp power stages for the V-Core VRM. Asus has also included their premium quality of life features, including an entirely toolless M.2 installation with Q-Release and Q-Latch, plus the new PCIe Q-Release Slim that lets you pull your graphics card out without having to press any buttons. As for expansion, you get 5 M.2 slots, but populating the second or third gen 5 M.2 slot will immediately chop your primary graphics card slot bandwidth from x16 down to x8. Interestingly, to make the rear connector layout work, Asus actually had to cut a few features found on the standard Hero. The front panel USB Type-C fast charging drops down from 60 watts to 27 watts, and the slim serial attached SCSI connector has been removed entirely. As expected, the rear I/O panel is fully loaded, sporting 10 USB ports in total, 2 USB 4 ports, and 8 10 gigabits per second ports. Networking is handled by Wi-Fi 7 alongside dual Ethernet ports, one 5 gigabit and one 2.5 gigabit. Audio is also top tier, featuring the Supreme FX ALC4082 codec paired with the ESS ES9219 quad DAC. All of that said, at $760 US, the omission of 10 gigabit LAN is incredibly disappointing to see, especially when competitors are offering it on significantly cheaper enthusiast boards. Ultimately, the ROG Crosshair X870E Hero BTF is a stunning piece of engineering that delivers the ultimate cable-free aesthetic, but between the massive price tag, the missing 10 gigabit networking, and the requirement to buy a specific case and GPU to really fully utilize it, this is a board reserved for deep-pocketed builders who absolutely refuse to look at a single cable. Finally, if the Dark Hero and Hero BTF just weren't enough for you, Asus has the absolute crown jewel of their AM5 lineup, the ROG Crosshair X870E Xtreme, coming in at an eye-watering $1,000 US. Just like MSI's Godlike or Gigabyte's Aorus Xtreme, this is a massive eATX behemoth designed as a Halo product to showcase everything the company can possibly cram into a single PCB. The most immediate thing you'll notice, aside from the sheer size and weight of the board, is the massive full-color 5-inch LCD screen built on the I/O shroud. It can display real-time hardware monitoring, system vitals, or custom animations and graphics, but of course, having a 5-inch screen inside your PC case, it's not completely necessary. I wouldn't say it's practical, but it does undeniably scream premium. Or dumb, you decide. For power delivery, it mirrors the Dark Hero with an absolutely overkill 20 110 amp power stage V-Core VRM, and for cooling you get massive VRM heatsinks connected by an embedded heat pipe, And then at the rear of the board, you will find a full-size metal backplate. And there's also an exclusive 3D vapor chamber M.2 heatsink specifically designed to keep your primary PCIe 5.0 SSD from throttling under sustained load. Like the other over-the-top ROG boards, it also includes Asus's new Nitro Path DRAM technology, allowing you to push your DDR5 memory to the absolute limits. As you'd expect, expansion and storage is comprehensive, though lane sharing remains an unavoidable AM5 reality. You get dual PCIe 5.0x16 slots and support for up to 5 M.2 slots. 3 of those slots are located directly on the board and run at PCIe 5.0 speeds, while the remaining 2 are PCIe 4.0 slots housed on an included ROG QDIMM.2 card that slots in next to your RAM. Naturally though, populating those secondary Gen 5 M.2 slots will force your primary graphics card slot to drop from x16 down to x8 bandwidth. Now, although the rear I/O is no joke, you might have expected more given the price tag, but then there is only so much Asus can do here. In total, you're getting a dozen high-speed USB ports, the standard 2 USB 4 ports, along 10 gigabits per second ports. And then when it comes to networking, absolutely nothing's left on the table here, offering dual wide Ethernet ports including a 5 gigabit connection and a massive 10 gigabit connection, paired with the latest Wi-Fi 7. Audio is of similar flagship grade, powered by the Supreme FX ALC4082 codec and an ESS ES9219 quad DAC. Ultimately, the Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Xtreme is a stunning, heavily over-engineered motherboard, and at $1,000 US it makes absolutely no sense in terms of value for a standard gaming build. But if you do happen to be building the ultimate showcase PC and want 10 gigabit networking, a 5-inch screen, and the absolute best Halo features that Asus has to offer, then this board is it. Alright, let's get into the VRM thermal testing. As always, these results were recorded after an hour-long stress test using the Ryzen 9 9950X in a 21 degree room, and I'm measuring the peak PCB temperature on the rear side of the motherboard, right behind the VRM components using K-type thermocouples. The main takeaway here is this: the power delivery on basically all of these new X870 and X870E motherboards is extreme overkill. Anything under 70 degrees is effectively asleep for a modern VRM, so do keep that in mind as we're ranking these products. Every single ATX motherboard here passed with flying colours. And starting at the top of our chart, we have the genuinely insane Gigabyte X870E Aorus Xtreme X3D AI top, which peaked at just 48 degrees. Now, given that it packs a 24-phase 110 amp VRM and costs $1,000 US, this board should run cool, but still, it's impressive to see. The Asrock X870E Taichi OCF peaked at just 51 degrees, and again, you'd expect a good result here given it packs 22 110 amp power stages for the V-Core VRM. The Asrock PG X870 Nova Wi-Fi was also great at just 52 degrees, and for $240 US, that's an excellent result. Gigabyte's X3D Ice lineup, so boards such as the X870E Elite X3D Ice and X870E Aorus Pro X3D Ice, both of those boards hit 53 degrees, while the slightly more premium X870E Master X3D Ice hit 54 degrees. The Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Xtreme is another $1,000 monster. It peaked at a very comfortable 55 degrees, along with the MSI X870E Gaming Plus Max Wi-Fi. Now, most of the newer motherboards that I've tested in this updated comparison operated between 58 and 62 degrees. The Asrock X870E Challenger Wi-Fi and Gigabyte X870 Aura Stealth Ice, they both peaked at a very respectable 58 degrees. The $1,300 Godlike X Edition hit 59 degrees, while the standard $900 Godlike hit 60 degrees. For boards with 24 110 amp power stages, you might expect them to run a little bit cooler, but overall the results are still really impressive. Asrock's X870 LiveMixer Wi-Fi peaked at just 59 degrees, and that means this $190 entry-level board is beating out models that cost literally 5 times as much. So that's an outstanding result, if only the Asrock brand wasn't tainted by those reliability issues. The MSI X870E Tomahawk Wi-Fi and Asrock X870 Taichi Creator both peaked at 60 degrees, along with the Asus Strix X870E A-Gaming Wi-Fi 7 Neo, Asus Crosshair X870E Dark Hero, and Asus Crosshair X870E Hero BTF. The Sapphire Nitro Plus X870EA PL Polar Edition and MSI MEG X870E Unify-X Max both settled at 61 degrees, followed closely by the Asus TUF Gaming X870 Pro Wi-Fi 7 W Neo, Asrock X870 Challenger Wi-Fi, and MSI X870E Ace Max at 62 degrees. Then, skipping down to the bottom of our graph, we find the MSI X870i Edge Ti Evo Wi-Fi at 86 degrees. Now, before anyone panics, 86 degrees is well within the safe operating limits of these VRM components, which are typically rated for 105 degrees or higher. And it is completely normal to see mini ITX motherboards running 20 to 30 degrees hotter than their ATX counterparts. And this is because you have a highly condensed VRM squeezed onto a tiny PCB covered by a much smaller heatsink, all trying to handle the same 200 watts plus heat load from the Ryzen 9 9950X. Considering the physical constraints, MSI's new active cooling solution kept the board perfectly stable, making this a successful pass for the little ITX motherboard. Okay, let's move on to the performance testing. For this, we are using Cinebench 2026 on a 10-minute loop, tested with the flagship Ryzen 9 9950X to see how these boards handle sustained, very multi-core heavy workloads out of the box. Before we break down the results though, it is crucial to establish some context here. The delta between the highest scoring new board on the chart and the lowest scoring board is roughly 5%. When we see variations like this in motherboard testing, it's almost entirely dictated by how each manufacturer configures their default BIOS power limits, so the PPT, TDC, and EDC, rather than some kind of limitation of the VRM hardware itself. Basically, any of these boards will perform identically if you go in and manually tune the PBO limits, but this shows us what you get right out of the box on optimized defaults. All of that said, taking the absolute top spot on the chart is an interesting one, the Gigabyte X870E Aero X3D Wood with a score of 2,415 points. Given this board actually has the weakest VRM of the premium X870E motherboards that we looked at, seeing it take the crown confirms that Gigabyte is letting the board run completely unleashed out of the box. Right behind it is the colourful iGame X870E Vulcan OC at 2,400 points, proving that its BIOS is also aggressively tuned out of the box for performance. Then we have the budget tier Asrock X870 Challenger Wi-Fi posting a score of 2,390 points. So the same kind of performance you'll see out of the box from the $700 Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Dark Hero, for example. Ultimately, nobody should look at this chart and think the boards at the bottom are slow or have bad power delivery or any other kind of issue. If you buy the Asrock X870E Challenger or Asus Hero BTF, for example, and simply enable PBO on the BIOS, they will immediately jump right up to the 2,400 point mark alongside the likes of the Gigabyte Aero would. This chart is simply a reflection of the out-of-the-box manufacturer BIOS behavior after an hour of load. To wrap up our testing, let's take a look at the total system power consumption measured at the EPS 12V rails during that same 10-minute Cinebench loop. This chart is the perfect companion piece to the Cinebench scores that we just looked at. As I mentioned earlier, variances in performance on modern motherboards can be a result of how aggressively the manufacturer configures the default BIOS power limits or how efficient the power delivery is. This graph provides us with a pretty clear indication as to who is sticking to AMD's Strix spec and who is just opening the floodgates to brute force the higher benchmark scores out of the box. Starting at the very top of the chart, which in this case means the lowest power draw, we have the boards that are running the most conservative out-of-the-box profiles. The Asrock X870E Challenger Wi-Fi, that pulled just 213 watts, and this board is the most conservative out of our newly tested batch. This perfectly explains why it's sat at the very bottom of our Cinebench chart. Asrock has strictly adhered to AMD's default power limits in this example. Then we have the Asrock PG X870 Nova Wi-Fi, which sat right next to it at 214 watts, which aligns with its lower Cinebench score. The Asrock X870E Taichi OCF and X870 Taichi Creator drew 218 and 219 watts respectively. It seems as though Asrock as a whole is playing very nicely with AMD's default specs on their premium boards, probably in an effort to avoid CPUs burning up in the socket. Quite interestingly, the Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Xtreme pulled just 219 watts, yet still put up a very competitive mid-2300-ish score in Cinebench. So this could point to an incredibly efficient VRM design that isn't wasting power as heat. The Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Hero BTF consumed a modest 220 watts, mirroring its slightly conservative Cinebench result. The mainstream sweet spot appears to be in the 223 to 231 watt range, and this is where the majority of these boards are balancing out-of-the-box performance with reasonable power limits. Here we find boards such as the MSI X870E Gaming Plus Max Wi-Fi, Asus ROG Strix X870E Gaming Wi-Fi 7 Neo, Asrock X870 LiveMixer Wi-Fi, and Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Dark Hero. Even some of the Xtreme boards such as the Gigabyte X870E Aorus Xtreme X3D AI Top, MSI X870E Godlike, and the Godlike X Edition are all within this range. Then down the bottom of the graph, we find the boards that have either thrown AMD's stock power limits out the window, or their VRM design isn't as efficient as it could be. For the most part, the power consumption deviation between boards is within 10%, but at the extremes we are looking at as much as a 20% difference. Okay, so based on all of the performance data, thermal testing, and feature breakdowns that we've covered in this video, one thing is abundantly clear. The VRMs on these X870 and X870E motherboards are extreme overkill, which certainly isn't a bad thing, given we are talking about a flagship chipset here. Every single one of the motherboards can comfortably handle a flagship Ryzen 9 9950X3D2, a 200 watt processor, so given that, your buying decisions shouldn't be based on power delivery. Instead, it should come down to the pricing in your region, and then other things like features, connectivity, PCIe lane management, all that sort of stuff. Now, before we get into it, I do have to address the Asrock AM5 CPU burning issue, or at least warn viewers of this potential issue, though I myself have not been able to replicate it, and I've been trying for months. I also have a number of friends with X3D gaming PCs built using Asrock 600 and 800 series motherboards who haven't had an issue either, so it's a bit of an odd one. It's difficult to accurately gauge how widespread this issue really is, but it is an issue. And for those of you who are unaware, in short, there has been a wave of AM5 CPU failures reported online, specifically affecting Asrock's 600 and 800 series motherboards running 9000 series processors, particularly the 9800X3D and 9950X, but it's not limited to those two parts. Initially, Asrock attributed the damage to user error, debris in the socket perhaps, or memory incompatibilities. However, after extensive investigation and over 100 reported failures, Asrock acknowledged that the root cause was their own overly aggressive Precision Boost Overdrive or PBO settings. Specifically, the thermal design current TDC and electrical design current EDC were set too high in Asrock's default BIOS, providing too much amperage and effectively burning out the CPUs. So to fix this, Asrock released BIOS revision 3.25 to lower these electrical limits. They are currently offering free motherboard replacements to affected users, though dead CPUs must be RMA'd directly through AMD or original retailers. Now, I'm not sure if these updated BIOS revisions have actually solved the issue. People are still reporting failures with the newer BIOS revisions installed, but you have to wonder if the damage was already done. Anyway, this is something to consider when buying an AM5 motherboard, and it's a shame as there are a number of really well featured and incredibly competitively priced models from Asrock. For example, the best budget options at under $200 include models such as the Asrock X870 LiveMixer Wi-Fi at $190 US. It's incredibly difficult to justify buying anything else in the entry-level bracket when that board exists. And then for just $10 more than the absolute baseline models, Asrock's managed to pack in features that compete with boards twice their price. You get 16 80-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, which saw the board peak at just 59 degrees. It packs 5 gigabit LAN, premium audio, and 4 M.2 slots, all with included heatsinks. That said, I believe the X870 LiveMixer Wi-Fi is meant to cost more like $230 US, so the $190 US price may be a sale price, and it's likely a result of Asus trying to convince people to buy their AM5 motherboards, and that pricing might not even be available by the time you watch this video. Then for between $200 and $250 US, we have the MSI MEG X870E Gaming Plus Max Wi-Fi, which is a great option. You get the benefits of the dual chipset, so more PCIe lanes and less aggressive bandwidth sharing, without paying the enthusiast tax, let's say. That board delivered an impressive 55-degree peak VRM temperature. It was also highly efficient, pulling just 223 watts out of the box while delivering a great Cinebench score. The Max designation means it gets a 64MB BIOS chip to future-proof it against upcoming AM5 processor generations without having to run a stripped-down BIOS interface. It also features a clean white-silver aesthetic and an easy release mechanism for the primary GPU slot. It's the most cost-effective way to get the full X870E experience with the future-proofed BIOS capacity and top-tier thermal performance. The original MSI MEG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi is also a great deal right now at just $360 US, and although it does have the smaller BIOS, the new Max version is essentially the same model with a 64MB BIOS and a $500 US price tag. So make sure you get the original at the discounted price would be my advice. It packs the same insane 18 110A V-Core VRM, a heavily stocked I/O panel with 13 USB ports, the slowest of which is 10 gigabits per second, and excellent PCIe lane management. So again, my advice is don't pay the almost 30% premium for the larger BIOS chip on the Max model, just get the original. It's difficult to recommend X870/X870E motherboards, not because there are so many of them, but more because so many of them are very good. The Gigabyte X870 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7, as an example, is an excellent option at just $230 US, as is the X870E version for $280 US. The Aorus Ice and Aorus Stealth Ice models are also amazing products that not only look really nice, but they offer excellent feature sets. I wasn't so excited about the Aero X3D wood models. They're certainly unique. The timber aesthetic just isn't something that I'm looking for in a motherboard. That said, the rest of the Gigabyte X3D range was really impressive. Then for those of you with more money than you know what to do with, there are some incredible, though admittedly unnecessary X870E motherboards. The Asus ROG Crosshair X870E Dark Hero is the pinnacle of the standard ATX form factor. You're also getting some awesome features such as 10 gigabit LAN and that beautiful stealthy all-black aesthetic. The MSI Godlike/Godlike X Edition and Gigabyte X870 Aorus Xtreme X3D AI Top. Last time I have to say that, I hope. They're all really incredible boards as well. They're all insane, but I do like the extra accessories you get with the Aorus Xtreme, along with the dual 10 gigabit LAN support. Finally, when it comes to the mini ITX motherboard, so the X870 versions, there are just 3 models to choose from. The Asus ROG Strix X870i Gaming Wi-Fi, Gigabyte X870i Aorus Pro Ice, and MSI MEG X870i Edge TI Evo Wi-Fi. Of these boards, I would say the outright best is the MSI model. It utilizes a clever 5-in-1 M.2 expander card, allowing you to cram in 3 M.2 slots, and that's a massive advantage given the Asus and Gigabyte ITX boards are limited to just 2 M.2 ports. You're also getting upgraded 5 gigabit LAN along with Wi-Fi 7 and the standard dual 40 gigabits per second USB 4 ports. The only potential weakness is the VRM, but it's certainly up to the task and it did pass all of our tests. It just ran considerably hotter than the Asus model. Anyway, I honestly can't talk about X870/X870E motherboards any longer. This video should have all the necessary data and information that you need to make an informed purchase. So compare the models in your region at your target price range and see which one provides the features and things that you require. And that is going to do it for this video. If you liked it, do that. If you watch the whole video, you absolutely deserve some sort of special reward. Not sure what that would be, but yeah, that's a huge effort. I don't expect that anyone will have watched the entire video, but you never know. If you want to support the channel more directly, we have the join button or Patreon. Signing up to either one of those things will give you access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested. If not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.